See, look at
Yeah.
this.
Fourth, we
Three,
get a countdown.
one. Oh my God, we're on. Okay, yes,
I
okay.
mean, it'd be one thing if we were recording like live, but you're so used to recording live, so that's like the thing. I've never done anything live,
I
so
know, and
I'm like, oh, cut it out, cut it out. If you say something asinine, just cut it out.
yeah, I've always had to be prepared for the live podcasts, all the ones that I've done, because, and I get there, and the minute before they start, I
Yeah.
just sit there and take some deep breaths because I feel totally, even if I've prepared, I'm totally unprepared. And then it's like, then it goes on, and I start talking, and I go wherever I go, but it is. But this is a pre-recorded, so we can cut this out. But it still feels the same to me. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, because you're conditioned that way. And I think that it's like, it's nice because, I think you've given yourself these great constraints. Unlike me, who, it's like I can try to say, hi, this is Nicole Helene. And, oh, wait, no, hi, this is Nicole.
Right.
No, one more time. I'm
Yes.
going to redo that now.
Right.
This is Nicole Helene. And
Right.
no,
Right.
I don't like that. And then I've got, 3 hours later, you know what? Not today. Not today.
Oh my
What's
God.
my name again?
Oh my God. If I did that, yeah, I would be forever. It was true. And what I find, what's challenging now before we get started today, as if we haven't
Yeah.
started today,
Yeah.
is that is going from, and I said this to you in one little thing I wrote, but going from being a solo podcaster for years to doing a co-host podcast is a real major challenge for me because it's a dialectical challenge because how do I preserve what I think or what I find personally valuable about what I do, which has always been in the context of solo. Maybe I'm interviewing somebody, but I'm still in charge. And then to shift over to a co-host, how do I preserve what I find valuable and also have you be preserving what's valuable about you and have us form a
Well,
joint
here's
thing?
the question. I mean, and this is so much about the work that I've been doing this week. It's all about, coming into the emerging future and really like, what does it mean to co-create an emerging future? And it's really systems work. And looking at like, what happens when you are, whatever it is, even if it's not a problem, how are we not getting fundamentalist about the moment we're in, whatever that looks like, and opening up, being, and we look at these paradigms of the open mind, the open heart, and the open will. And that was kind of the framework that we looked at, but really being in a space of non-judgment, letting yourself be affected, letting yourself be touched and kind of working from kindness, and then the courage to surrender into a space of the unknown. And I think that that's kind of apropos because it's like, all right, well, what if we don't preserve? Like, what if there's something new that neither of us know? Maybe I have my ideas about what it means to work and co-host and support you and all of that, and to bring in a different perspective. Maybe you're like, well, I want to do what's been successful, but maybe part of what this can be, or the opportunity is like, it's like, oh, well, maybe, the future is maybe it's more about collaboration. Maybe it's less about, maybe it's like, how can we let go of our individual agendas? Maybe, I don't know. But like, and see what this, this genesis of two minds with different perspectives, with different approaches, like what is that third thing that arises? And because if we're both kind of like, well, this is what it's supposed to be, and we're both kind of like holding on, that's what a lot of what we kind of played with this week. It's like,
Interesting.
That's what prevents us from actually seeing what's possible.
That's really interesting. What you remind me of when you say this is a time when I was about 20 and I left college, and because I didn't know what I was doing or where it was going. So I left, and during 9 months of the following year, I lived in Boston, in Dorchester, with an African-American family that I got on a poster, on a bulletin board, because I was going to be working near there. And this family was up from the South, and there were 8 kids in the house, and the mom and the dad came and went. And the they ate in a way that was so totally different than how I ate. So I came in with my little well-controlled yogurt that I like to make my own, my granola that I like to make my own, my brown rice, and my various other weird things. From their point of view, they felt so sorry for me. And they had all this great food, you know, pork of different kinds and collard greens and sweet potato pie and all this great stuff. And I'm sitting there with and so I carved out my little area of the refrigerator, and it made all of them so sad they could barely stand it. You know, it's like, and then if you tuned in 3 months later, I'm eating collard greens, sweet potato pie, their fried chicken, and every once in a while a pig roast, and it's like I'm eating this stuff and really liking it. I've gained a few pounds, and I just feel like a new entity formed because I also affected them. So I know what you're talking about.
They have some brown rice in there and everything.
Put a little brown rice in with the collard greens. Right. How about brown rice and sweet potato pie?
No, it's delicious.
But so this idea is a good correction for me because I'm highly soloist in the way I write, the way I think, the way I teach, and
but you're not,
how I've been.
And that's so funny because I think you're talking about yourself that way. And when I think of you as yes, you're writing. You've written this amazing book, which I'm a huge fan of, but you're teaching, at least from what I've seen of it, and even the way you write, and even your podcast as you've done it, you're always collaborating with other people, with other thinkers, whether it's your best friend who's no longer physically here, but who's always kind of a part of your kind of dialogue, whether it's Marsha Linehan, whether it's your patients and experiences you've had. I think that, part of being dialectical is inherently being part of a system, being impacted, it's being connected. And I think you're so palpably aware of that like the last thing I would ever think of you is someone that's like highly solo. When I think highly solo, I think someone that's, that can't be touched or that's unreceptive to influence. And when I think of like even the books we've exchanged and the conversations that we've had, I think of you as someone that really likes to engage in a dialogue of ideas. And that to me is again, like thinking about open system versus closed system, where it's like, no, this is the truth of how things are. And that's just never been my experience of you. So I just think it's very interesting.
I'm a hybrid. You are
a hybrid. I think that you are an individualist that's also a great co-creator and collaborator.
Well, I like the positive spin on this because it helps me. But I find it's interesting what you're saying. It helps me move forward and think to say, well, what are we going to create together, and not know, really not know. Really don't know.
I think that's so fun, and I think the opportunity to experiment and to let each other impact the other, and to let this third thing to kind of arise. I mean, I think if we're talking about to live in the dialectic, I think there's such a really interesting opportunity here for this dialogue to really model that. Here's the German sirens. You can hear them.
Yes. Nicole, if you don't know this, of course you don't know this, she's in Berlin right now in Germany. So, wow, it's an international podcast with the Polizei are there.
Yeah.
Der
really
Polizei.
Look at you.
All right. Yeah, well, I'll be in Germany in a couple months, and I'm going to be speaking I'm giving a lecture, and I'm going to try to see how much of it I can give in German, because that's the language I used to. That's the only other language other than English that I ever learned. So I'll be working on it.
That's impressive.
All right.
I mean, I've tried to pronounce some things here, and it's gone.
Pronunciation, is a big deal.
Yeah. Okay.
So look, here's my idea. Listen to me. Here's my idea of what we're going to talk about today, and where I'm going to start us out, and what kind of agenda I'm going to set, and then we'll see where the heck we end up.
All right.
But my idea is this: we throw around the term dialectics, and a lot of people in the DBT world throw around the word dialectics, and actually a lot of people have a good understanding of it. because Marshall Linehan laid it out so clearly what it means in psychotherapy. And other psychotherapies have also been dialectical. They just haven't used the term. And then it goes back to Marx and Engels, and then it goes back to the Greeks, and it goes a long ways back. And so but what I want to do to sort of lay the ground for future conversations, I'd like to spell out what I think are the essence of being dialectical. So that, and then, because I think we're going to be referring to it many times and trying to use it many times. And it isn't like I'm like a philosopher who has the complete grip and I'm like the expert on dialectics. But I've thought about it a lot and I've used it a lot. So I have a particular place that I come from about it that's probably built within a clinical situation, but also trying to take it further than that in my interpersonal life. So I first want to spell out what I think are the steps and principles of dialectics. And then I've written a song about dialectics, and I want to sing a song.
Good. Oh, good.
So that's coming. So that gives some of you the knowledge that you should stick around, and some of the rest of you know the knowledge you should leave soon.
Get out of here.
Get out fast. I may start singing the song at any moment. I just wrote it this morning. So it's anyway. So and then I want to the degree we can today, and followed up by next time. There's so much shit going on in the world, our world. I mean, today, just today was a compromise, sort of narrowly defined compromise bill about gun reform or gun safety, gun availability, etc. That I think if you follow carefully how that came about and how they came to this so-called compromise, that it is absolutely in the spirit of dialectics, and even in that the bill that is apparently going to pass is now going to be a new thesis, and there's going to be immediately all kinds of disagreement about it. Yep. So it's just a perfect example of how you can work hard to come to a synthesis of two opposing positions. And then whatever synthesis you come to will immediately give rise to opposition. And then you've got a new dialectic going on. So I want us to get to that. And also, of course, we also learn at the same goddamn moment that the Supreme Court has just decided and announced, and with Clarence Thomas's opinion, that it's possible in New York and other states to have people going around and having being able to carry guns without restrictions.
Yeah, that was surprising.
And which is really like happening at the same moment as this narrowly defined bill. And at the same moment, they come out with the abortion decision, which is not what we had really even pre-planned to talk about. But that is too. It's like another huge dialectic, another synthesis of a certain kind of a massive opposition for the last 3 decades. So it's really quite an incredible moment, and it's probably just the beginning, given our Supreme Court, of other things like this. So I don't know.
Yeah,
there's
and
so
I think
much.
it's worth acknowledging just the fact that it's coming out of the Supreme Court and the the politicization of the court at this moment in time, and really what that's doing to the dialogue in our country at large. I mean, just that it's really, I think, the nature of trust and how we all feel with regards to being able to trust our governing bodies. I think that's really under threat right now, democracy, overall, but particularly the Supreme Court, which to, some extent was able to stay separate in terms of being an arena of respect, while the rest of the government seemed to kind of get pulled down. And now that it seems to be just another political kind of fighting ground is
agree.
Important.
It does. It feels
about
like
what that means for dialectics.
There's not a higher court of appeal that feels like you can appeal. I mean, this feels like very much part and parcel of the Republican government, the Republican within the government, and the 3 Trump Supreme Court justices really carried it this way. And at the same moment that we're having these investigations of our January 6th insurrection, in which just yesterday was all about how Donald Trump tried to take over and corrupt the Justice Department in his behalf. So it's all of these so-called separate institutions are really in threat. So I think it's a huge, I mean, it isn't always like this. There's always things going on, but these are sort of earth-shattering things, I think.
And how we talk about these things while, really honoring that there are individuals that are not all lumped together in this seemingly enmeshed catastrophe.
Yeah.
How to maintain that distance from I think the real meaningful divisions of opinion. And the people that, because I think that we can kind of muddy the waters very easily when we look at this and just say, okay, well, this is just a political nightmare.
Right.
But how do we have these conversations and really hold space for all the parties? Similarly, I think like we did to the last conversation when we had where we just recognize, all right, we may not personally identify with all parties involved, but how can we honor and respect the humanity of all parties, and particularly when it's, when we see a former president behaving so badly. What does it mean to really see the problem as it is without demonizing one side or the other? I think that's really tricky right here and right
Very
now.
tricky.
And I think it's super important.
So let me launch into this about the about a sort of a step-by-step consideration about dialectics. And so the first thing I would say about it is that when people talk about dialectics, whether they're talking about it in treatment or elsewhere, they're really talking about several different things. So one thing is it's a kind of a world point of view, a worldview of how change comes about, how one moment of truth evolves to the next moment of truth, to the next moment of truth, to the next moment of truth, every moment being different, and every moment setting the stage for changes in the next moment. And how, so the first thing is that, and at the core, and then there are other things that I'll get to, but within that core, the core idea, which is familiar to most people who know about dialectics at all, is that there's this little formula, that there's a thesis. In other words, I'll put it this way, there's one truth, let's say truth number one. Truth number one. And then truth number one gives rise to truth number two, which might be absolutely in opposition of truth number one. So now you have a thesis and an antithesis or an antithesis. So now you've gotten to this step. So for instance, just this week, I was supervising a group of a DBT team. They presented a case. The case was like this. There was an absolute good example of this. Though once I started thinking about this, every single supervision and every single treatment I did this week, it was all about dialectics. Once you start to see it, it's like, oh my God, it's I just went and got something for lunch and I was caught up in a dialectical thing. I mean, most things that are dialectical, as I'll say later, just settle themselves. You don't need to pay a ton of attention. But so here's one that wasn't settling itself. A family was going to go on vacation up to the Catskill Mountains from New York, and for the summer for like 3 weeks or something. And they wanted the whole family to come. And their 18-year-old daughter didn't want to come. She wanted to stay home in their apartment and be there and see her friends, and they absolutely didn't want to go. And she was like putting her feet in the ground and saying, I'm not going. And they're saying, well, you have to go. Of course you're going. Because not only are we a family and we always go together, though this is the first time they've had a kid at that age, 18, but also because you haven't been very safe the last few months. She had had a couple of incidents where she had gotten herself in trouble in a sexual relationship and also had been in a hospital briefly. And so they didn't feel comfortable leaving her home. So they were saying, oh, so maybe we should leave. Mom should stay home. No, mom's not staying. No, I need to be, I'm 18 years old. I'm independent now. So what you have is a thesis, truth number one, we're all going on vacation. Truth number two, no, I'm not. No, we're not. I'm not. You guys go.
You guys have a great time. I'm not going.
Exactly. I wouldn't be caught dead again in the Catskills. So it's sort of like, yeah. So you've got that, and then where you go from there, That isn't yet what I'd call dialectics,
No.
because dialectics requires another step. Where do you go from there? And I was thinking about it. I think there's about 5 different directions you can go from there. Once you get this sort of standoff between two opposing positions, number one, you can just remain in a standoff in many situations. Like, for instance, the gun control debate has been in more or less a standoff for about 30 years, actually. And so has the abortion debate, you might say. Some of these things are, and in some relationships, things become a stalemate, a standoff. Nothing much is happening. They don't get worse or more extreme. They don't get closer. They don't resolve anything. And a lot of people live out their lives that way, right? I mean, it's sad, but true. So that's option number one. You can just stay there in a stalemate. Option number two, you could move to extremes. So option number two is the girl could run away from home, or the family could kidnap her and take her to the Catskills in some way, shape, or form. Or they could severely threaten her, and they could be having knockdown, drag-out fights about it. Now, and then they both start out in opposition to each other, but now the opposition spread further to extremes. Now you're stuck with extremes, which are hard to ignore. Usually something has to happen there. Option number three.
You can't sustain the extremes.
You can't sustain the extremes.
Got it.
And I do think that what happened with the gun control debate after the killings of all these children was it put it over the edge. And you could know that's complicated because it brought in another whole set of concerns and systems that I think moved the whole debate in a different direction than it would have gone in. But the third option,
yes, right.
The third option is that you could just sort of have this relativistic position of just live and let live. Okay, you're an 18-year-old. You go do your thing. We're going to go do our thing. There's no big problem here. All right? That's a way that you can go with an opposition, is you can just say, well, oppositions exist in the world, so here's another opposition, big deal.
So give in?
It would require, I mean, that particular option would mean that the family would give in and say, okay, we won't do that. We're not going to do anything about that. All right, everybody, all of you kids, go wherever you want on vacation. It's like, it creates chaos often, but a relativistic point of view. Then there's another point of view, which is to figure out who's got the right answer. And go after the truth, assuming that there's a truth on one side or the other. And the family is right because they're a family, and of course everybody would agree, etc. And so everybody lines up with the family except the 18-year-old, or
Right,
the
because
18-year-old's right.
Because the 18-year-old's right, because of course it's time for her to be able to express her autonomy. And why on earth would she have to honor her family when she's now an adult?
Exactly. So there could be a big argument about who's right. And this is what Linehan then called, and other people have called it, a universalistic way of thinking. Universalistic way of thinking is to decide which is the right one and come down on that side. A relativistic way of thinking is to say, nobody really has the right answer. Do whatever the hell you want. And then there's the extreme positions, and then there's the forever stalemate. And then there's a dialectical approach. So none of those are specifically moving in a dialectical direction. So a dialectical direction would be saying, let's look at the essence of what's important to the 18-year-old that's not getting acknowledged or addressed by the family going on vacation and taking her. And let's look at the wisdom and the validity of the family wanting her to come, both because they're a family, that's really important, and they want to preserve that, and they want to preserve her safety because they're worried if she's left alone, there's going to be a problem. So it gets set up like that. And so it's interesting what happened in this particular family, because this was not the first week this group had talked to me about this. What happened in this family after some dialogue, and of course, dialectical solutions almost always involve dialogue, and sometimes a lot of dialogue, and sometimes not so much. But even in the gun debate, there was constant discussion the last few weeks at the level of people who make decisions, like constant. People were running into each other at the Senate gym at 5:30 in the morning, and having conversations. Like Tom Tillis from North Carolina is hanging out with Chris Murphy from Connecticut, and they're talking. I mean, all day, all night, people are coming to this, and often that's what's required. So the family was encouraged to be having a dialogue. They were encouraged to be having the parents listen carefully to the 18-year-old, having the 18-year-old try to listen carefully to the parents about what matters. And then they came up with a synthesis so that she could stay home with certain conditions. And the conditions were that she have a friend of hers who's a particularly safe and responsible person, but who's also a very good friend, come stay with her during that time, which actually she liked the idea of. And also that she have something to do, that there's some plan of stuff she's going to do, some expectation, and also that she, every once in a while, but not too much, just inform the parents what's going on so they know she's alive and they know that she, not in deep shit. I mean, and so this was an arrangement, and I don't know how it'll go, because now that becomes the new thesis. That's the synthesis, and it puts together what matters to the family. They gave up a little bit, and she gave up a little bit. Now she has someone else living with her. Now she has a couple expectations. The family gave up wanting her to be there with them. And so they each gave up some, but they each acknowledged something that was a very high priority of the other party. And then they move on and they form this arrangement. And that becomes what in dialectics would be called the synthesis, which, as I was saying before, immediately gives rise to another antithesis or more, right?
So how would you distinguish that from a compromise? Because I know that a synthesis is not a compromise. So how is that different than a compromise in that case or in general?
I think the thing that makes it compromises is when the people actually involved, or the person involved, depending what it is, experiences the arrangement as a complete watering down of what's important to them. It's a dilution. They got away from what's important to them. And so they sacrificed something, but then they sacrificed too much. And then neither party, both parties end up with a dilute approximation of what actually matters to them. And that would be a compromise. And how would you know if it's a compromise? I don't think you can know this, Nicole, from the outside. I think you'd only know this if you are the 18-year-old and you'd say, yes, this matters to me. This is a good arrangement. And the family feels like, okay, we can go with this. We feel a little bit safer with this. And we realize she's 18 years old and she needs to do this. So it kind of depends on what it feels like inside the arrangement, whether it's a watered down compromise just for the sake of compromise, or whether it's actually a synthesis which preserves what are very high priorities or values of each party.
Got it. So whereas in a compromise, both people end up feeling like they've lost. In a synthesis, there's an opportunity, maybe not for a total win-win, but an opportunity for both parties to feel honored in some way, to feel like what they care about has been recognized, and that's moving forward into the synthesis in a way that's meaningful. So they're validated.
They're validated. They feel validated. And just like when we talk about validation, the only way you know if somebody's validated is if they actually experienced it as validation, no matter what the other person thinks they did. So I think this is a really important distinction that you're asking about, because I think that people do talk about, well, it's not a compromise. If you go to any training in DBT and if people spend 5 minutes on dialectics, they'll say it's not a compromise. But what does that really mean? Your question gets at it. It really means something that's more subjective than, you can't just say, well, this sounds like a compromise, but it actually didn't feel like a compromise to the parties involved. So who gives a damn what it sounds like? It sort of actually worked because both people felt like, okay, what's most important, that we gave up something because we recognize the other party needs something important. But we also hung on to something that's very important to us. And you kind of have to prioritize what's most important to you in a dialectical process. So that I think this happened about the gun debate, is that there were, each side, you might say, gave in to or gave up something that they were holding before. Like the Republican side gave up on what are called red flag laws, and they gave up on what's called the boyfriend loophole, without going into all of these right now. They gave up on just any fact that somebody under 21 years old is going to have a little bit more of a background check about their ability to handle guns, whereas the Democrats gave up a lot. I mean, and so you can't add up.
It's not a tit for tat. It's not a tit for tat.
It's not tit for tat.
It's not something where you can say, well, oh, I gave up all of this. Because both people are coming in with different expectations of what the truth should look like.
That's right. So I would think that the Democrats might feel more like, well, we gave up background checks, we gave up banning assault rifles, we gave up this, we gave up that, and also it doesn't get mentioned anywhere in this agreement that it's a relatively well-established fact, though one could argue it, that having a ton more guns available is going to lead to a ton more killings. That's just seems to be a fact in the world if you look at countries that have more or less guns. But that's off the table entirely. The emphasis is on mental health and school safety and stuff like that the Republicans are okay with. But I think that it's a compromise in one respect, but it's a synthesis given how locked down the whole argument has been for so long. It's a breakthrough because of that. Even if it's kind of narrow in its scope, it still is going to affect some people, and maybe even more importantly, it broke this stalemate.
Yes.
So I think it's
significant. That's important. Yeah, well, because I think if we think about the other alternatives that you delineated, in many cases, we look at dialectics in stuck situations where it can get very zero sum. So, both sides would like to have everything. We always want everything that we want. But typically it's like, well, I either give up nothing, and so I get nothing, you get nothing, and we both stay pissed off.
Mm-hmm.
Or there is some movement. So it's easy to say, okay, well, I didn't get everything that I wanted, so it was, I lost.
Right.
If you come at it through the lens of that zero sum, well, this was my list and I only got this.
Right.
But if you come at it through the lens of, all right, the objective is to move forward, to get out of the stuck space, then there's progress. Because then it allows other elements to kind of inject themselves into the system. Other things can move, other things can open up.
Exactly. And
then change can occur.
So you have to sort of settle for a meaningful step there, but it's not just a watered down compromise. It's actually, and from a Democratic point of view, the fact that after this many years, decades really, that the Republicans made a decision that is disapproved of by the NRA is a very significant situation. I mean, that's just totally unexpected that these people who've been relying on the NRA to fund their campaigns for a long time found that there were other factors that weighed even more heavily on them, such as worrying about what suburban voters in the November elections are going to do and in the next presidential election, that they keep alienating suburban voters who care about gun safety. So it's a lot of things were in motion. So let me return to this scheme. So we've got, like, in every situation, and I've just been running into it everywhere I go this week and last week, is like, okay, there's a thesis, there's an opposing force. Now there you stand with two opposing forces. Now what do? There's various things you can do, and sort of one pathway is a dialectical pathway, and it's moving towards a synthesis. All right. Now, the next thing I want to say about that is that there are certain conditions that facilitate dialectical processes. Some of those conditions are contextual and how you see the universe, and some of them are psychological. Like even in the gun control debate, the fact that the people who were at the center of hammering this out have temperaments that are more moderate than some of the extremists on both sides allowed it to move forward because they agreed to drop some hot button issues on both sides, and they had calmer temperaments, and they kept dialogue going. So that helps with dialectics, is trying to stay out of the hot judgmental rhetoric helps, and try to still capture what's important, which is a challenge itself. Another thing that matters is if you're capable of thinking in a complex manner, so that you can be flexible. You can sort of you can take a position of your own strongly, but you can temporarily divorce yourself from your own position and look from above and say, wait a minute, I'm in a dialectical thing. I guess the other side matters too. And so let me see if I can understand the other side more deeply, and see if it moves me. So it's that capacity to be abstract and one step above and see the world as a complex and competing marketplace of ideas and projects is very helpful. If you don't have that, you tend to get stuck in oversimplified, narrowly defined, and rigid positions. So that helps. It also helps to realize that as part of the concept of dialectics, that you understand the universe to be made up of a massive number of ingredients that are constantly changing. I mean, every second changing, not like once every 30 years. No, everything is actual, whether it looks like it or not.
Always.
It's always changing. So when something comes up that's a surprise, it actually, if only you were watching carefully, or if you had access to the data,
you'd always be shocked.
If a building falls down, and it's like, how the hell did that happen? If we knew the infrastructure of the building every minute, we'd say, of course it happened. So there's this idea that everything's changing constantly. And of course, if things are changing constantly, it's like the universe is a soup of ingredients. And as things change, collisions are happening all the time, like in the ocean, waves are, it's just actually, that's the nature of reality. And the other assumption about the nature of reality is what you were saying at the beginning about where you're at in this, in the workshops that you're in right now, about the systemic nature of reality, that everything is interdependent with the next thing over and the next thing over and the next thing over. So actually, the way to change things is sometimes not to intervene in what you think you're changing, but you got to intervene in something 3 steps away. And that may be the best way to change. But it had to have your mind open to that change is constant, interdependency of systemic elements is always going on. And then there is this process of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. To me, that's sort of an attempt to define the package.
And this might be redundant
dialectics
a little bit with what you said, but I mean, I think just holding the view that truth evolves really helps with that idea of flexibility. I think if you're someone that believes there is a truth or the truth, capital T, then it's much more difficult to get into a dialectical kind of dialogue, because if you believe that you're giving up what is right in order for something that that is wrong, if you see the world through that binary lens, then it is really, really challenging to enter into any of these other frameworks or lenses. But if you have the view that there are multiple coexisting, sometimes contradictory truths always in operation, that then it's like, okay, truth is always evolving. Then it's like, all right, where in the river am I stepping, or am I dipping my toe today? And it may look like the same river, but it's never ever the same. And you're not so, your view isn't so attached to it being right or wrong. There's space for things to flow a bit.
And I think what you're bringing up is something that sometimes doesn't immediately come to mind when people first are learning about dialectics. So because there's one of the better writings that I've come across about dialectics in treatment, in DBT, and what's the philosophy of it as it enters into treatment there, is in a book that came out a year or two ago. It's a chapter by Jennifer Sayers and Marshall Linehan. It's on dialectics in DBT. And there's one sentence there that struck me because I hadn't really thought of it that way, and it's very close to what you were just saying. And it's that, yes, dialectics is understood to be a model in which truth is always evolving, and the current truth is not the same as the truth tomorrow, and the truth here isn't the same as the truth there. And that's why you have to have a complex view of things in order to grasp that, because it's a lot simpler to just decide what the truth is and do it. But what they said was, and I think, I don't know who wrote this, but probably Jennifer, but maybe Marcia, wrote that at any given moment, in any given context, there is a truth. That there is such a thing.
So interesting, and I think both exist. And this is very Buddhist, but there's you could say that absolute truth and relative truth always coexist. So there's the kind of that absolute, the kind of the big global truth of the way things are. If any individual, none of us, we all live in our subjective realities. But then there's also the kind of compilation of all that data that none of us are ever privy to, because we all come from conditioning, right? We're all coming from our own perspective. So it's impossible for any person to ever really see the whole picture. But there is a whole picture. Just because no one individual can ever really, grasp onto it doesn't mean there is no such thing as truth. It's just that, like, these two things are always coexisting. So there's this kind of global truth of what is real, and then there are all of our individual perceptions that that are intersecting, that vary, that are informed by and shaped by causes and conditions and subjective reality. So and I think that's a really interesting space to hold all the time, to say, all right, well, we all always have blind spots, but that doesn't mean that everything's relative and we just throw it all away and say nothing's meaningful. That there is no such thing as reality. It's both. It's always that and I think that's a dialectic in and of itself.
Yeah, you were saying this makes me think of another case of a couple where I've supervised the therapist for a long time with the same couple, an intensely conflicted couple. It's amazing they're still together. And it's probably by his efforts that they're still actually working on their relationship, and it's improved some. But oh my God, do they stand off. So just last week, they had a situation in which they have a chronic conflict about her feeling underappreciated and feeling not empathized with by her husband because he's so obsessed with finances and security. And he's always feeling underappreciated for how hard he's working on the finances and everything. And so this just goes on. And then last week, what happened was she lost her job. And so in losing her job, she comes home to her husband and says, oh my God, I lost my job. And she was very sad about it. And he's immediately like, oh my God, what are we going to do?
What are we going to do about the finances?
What are we going to do about the finances? And she said, I can see where you're going already. All you give a damn about is the finances. You don't care about, you have a wife right here that just lost her job, that's in need of somebody who has a little bit of empathy. Do you not have any empathy for me? And he's like, do you not realize what this means for the finances of the family? And they just could not. I mean, it was sort of like classic thing. And so their therapist, who's actually very good at what he does, he's like working with each of them to just not to find an exact synthesis. It was like move towards a synthesis, but move towards it how? By having him put on the shelf for 10 minutes his financial concerns and just let his mind go into his wife's mind and see what it's like. And think about that and talk with her about that as if, and then have her go in and do a similar thing of where he lives and how he takes responsibility for the security of the family, and then how they each have to give up a little bit of time in order to get into the other one's foxhole, and that out of that, not knowing how it'll work, but that's really a dialectical way of working with a couple, and it's a standard way to work with a couple. I mean, I think about that's a lot what really good couples there. It's what Johnny Depp and Amber Heard never had, as far as I can tell. It's like it was just a complete dialectical breakdown and shit show.
I can't.
that-
That's a whole other episode. But yeah, no, that's a whole other episode.
Yes.
But no, I mean, I think what you're saying is so right. I think that it's because when you are looking at the world through the lens of care means taking care of the finances. Care means safety and security. That's what care means.
That's how I love you.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I love you. That's how I take care of it. Like, that's it. Then it's like, it's an affront to hear, can't you think about anything else? Because it's like, what are you talking about? That's all I think about. Right. And at the same time, when care means being empathized with, I mean, and it's not that either is more or less real, valid, or true, but it's exactly what you're saying, to be able to step away from your attachment to, like, my way is the way. And
Exactly.
if you only knew how bad it feels to be in my space.
Right.
And I think that really does require this trust, this again, this willingness to say, yeah, we don't know how it's going to work. And, we can see that there's a possibility that there's more than what I can see. And if you don't know that there's more than what you can see, if you're and usually I think what happens is with fear or pain in general, the more distressed we are, the harder it is to access that capacity to step outside of ourselves.
And,
it's like
and
our
also,
amygdala's firing, our limbic system's gone crazy, and we're just caught up in that space of, like, it's survival mode. So it's like, I think that's part of that feedback loop that's so hard to break out of, because that access to the space that allows us to actually, be a little creative and think with some complexity, that gets short-circuited.
It's gone. And it's especially, I mean, what you hope happens, I mean, what if it's a lucky break, one person's going through hell and the other one's not. I mean, and so one person can sort of be the generous one for a while and sort of let go of their attachment, as you put it, and listen to the other one. But when both people are equally frightened or equally thrown into turmoil, there's not much left for a while. And sometimes the best solution there is to just acknowledge the reality of that and don't try to solve it right now. Just cut off. Just
until it's a whole society.
What do you mean, until it's a whole society?
It's dysregulated. Until
Right.
it's a whole country that's screaming and yelling and dysregulated.
That's right. That's right.
And who is pushing the pause button?
Yes. All right. I'm gonna sing you my dialectical song.
Okay. I'm gonna pay very good
Got to
attention.
see how to do this, because now I'm, because of my guitar teacher talking to me about sound, I'm supposed to keep my mouth next to the microphone, only 2 inches away, and that, which means you can't move around very much. You have to stay with the microphone. He said you just can't. He said if you watch really professional podcasters, even when they move around, look at the interface between their mouth and the microphone. It stays the same, and they learn over time what that is. I think this is way above my level, but I've got to try. So here I've got this song written out because it's brand new. I mean, you're in such good situation here because no one has ever heard this song.
I've never felt luckier than I do right now. Never.
Now, how can I do this? Keep myself next to the microphone. And of course, there's the guitar sound, which might not be loud enough. I'm going to just do the best I can here. All right. Imagine me and you, I do. I think about you all the time. You're on my mind. We started out so close. How did we come to be unhappy together? I disappointed you. I know I didn't give you what you asked from me to grow, and then you disappointed me. You hurt me so. Unhappy together. I can't see me loving nobody but you. You're in my dreams. What's come down between us has pushed us apart to extremes. Me and you and me are opposite, apparently. It had to be. It gives us fits, but if we can connect, perhaps we'll be happy together. Turn the page. I'll try to understand what I have missed and meet you there. It's been so long since we have kissed. It isn't fair. Can't we loosen up a bit and meet in the middle? We gotta solve the riddle. I can't see me loving nobody but you for all my life. Dialectically, we can move down the road to end our strife. Me and you and me can find the middle path where we can be. I am the one for you and you're the one for me. So happy together. How is the weather? There you are.
I was dying to know how you were going to get the word dialectically in there. That was great.
That was hard. It was a lot.
Really impressive.
There was a lot of work on getting that word in there. Yes.
I mean, that was smooth.
Yes, there you go.
Wow.
It's
That was
good.
awesome.
It's good to have just an audience of one. See, this is when it's good to not have a solo podcast. Because I would, as you may know from my podcast, I've done a lot of these songs I've made up and I never hear anything, you know.
I can't, there's nothing worse. You need the applause.
Yes. There you go.
I'm happy to be of service.
Nicole, do you sing?
I don't. You know what? I used to, and I took a lot of singing. I had a lot of singing instruction in my acting training, but I am a bad singer. It's just the truth.
Yeah, well, I think I've proven that doesn't mean you can't sing on a podcast.
Maybe I'm just not as you know what? Maybe we'll do a duet someday. I am not so confident to be. I'm still thinking that it should be different than it is. I'm still fighting my reality with my singing voice.
All right.
But once upon a time, I did sing. But you know what? It's an experimental space. I'm open to eventually, seeing
this
what I
might
do.
happen. You came to a training once with myself and Kelly Kerner.
Yes.
And there was one time, not at that training, but a previous training that Kelly and I were doing, and I did one of my DBT songs. And then I asked her if she sang, and she said, well, she doesn't really sing, but she used to sing. I said, what do you mean you used to sing? Well, when she was younger, like in her early 20s, she used to sing at weddings. She actually sang, quote, professionally. And so she sang. So then she and I sang a duet. I forget what it was.
That must have been awesome.
Yeah. I don't know if it was awesome, but it was fun.
Okay, well, I think she's probably quite a bit better than I am, but I can speak with a bit of a rhythm. If that
all right. So you can rap.
I don't know about that, but
That's all that is. It's rapping is speaking with the rhythm.
Okay. Well,
all right.
had I known that, I don't know that I would have claimed it, but again, I'm open to giving it all a try.
All right. So what do we got? We have a little bit of time left. I just wonder, now I've kind of laid out one version, not complete and not deep, but I think some of the essential ingredients I'd like us to have on the table going forward when we talk about dialectics is I think it captures some of the basics.
I'd like to ask a question. This is something I've thought about quite a bit with dialectics. So, you've really described, and this is how I've read and understood dialectics, is when there's two kind of opposing sides. But so often in these complex problems that we look at and talk about socially, there are more than two sides. There are many sides. And so what is the way to approach or think about those tensions, those oppositions, when maybe it's just not as simple as, one polarity?
Yeah, I've thought about that too. Let me use as a metaphor. I mean, the way I come at that is that this is a fairly simplistic formula to say that here's how reality works. There's thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and there's always two opposing sides. There's obviously sometimes, many times, more than two, and sometimes way more than two opposing sides. So one of the principles of dialectics, at least within treatment, is that dialectics has this idea of inclusivity, of there's several different people looking at an elephant from different angles and they all see something different, right? That metaphor.
Yeah.
And so that's a dialectical metaphor. I mean, six different people are seeing six different things when it's the same animal, and then they start exchanging with each other, and they could fight about, whether the animal has a trunk or just a tail, for instance, depending where you're standing. And so there's a lot of possible sides. Another metaphor that I think of in relation to this is that I kind of think if you think of the world, the whole universe, as the ocean, and there's all kinds of movement always going on. If you're ever at the ocean and you're just looking out, even if it's a calm night, water's always moving. Water is always moving. And so there might be white caps coming up. There might just be a little sort of ripples going on, but there's always this stuff going on. And so whenever there's kind of a collision between vectors coming, like if one's coming from the south and one's coming from the north, and then they go up into a wave like this, you'd say, oh, it's obvious. There's a dialectical dilemma, is that there's two opposing forces and they're causing a conflict. But what if 5 different waves are coming in the same place? You don't want to exclude that. It just makes it more complicated. So I just think this idea of dialectics and talking about a thesis, antithesis, and an opposition between two things is actually just a simplified way, because it's very complicated, to say what's really true, which is that at this moment, the number of things impacting on my brain as I speak is just outrageous. I mean, my grandfather, who was a farmer and who later in his life gave speeches to farmers in the Pacific Northwest about economics of farming, which I didn't know until I was already a teacher. My father, who was a soloist in the choir, and I grew up watching him be up there singing "O Holy Night" at Christmas time. I mean, Marcia Linehan, my office here, the fact that my son is going to pick me up in a little while and we're going on a little road trip, the fact that I'm talking to you and you're sick and you're in Germany, I mean, and the fact that the whole landscape of our political system and legal system is rapidly shifting. I mean, that just touches it. So there's so many things going on. I wouldn't want to exclude any of them. And what I'm doing right now is a product of all of them, including just the nature of my temperament and my brain and stuff, right? So
so in that way, it's almost like the dialectical, it's like an evolution or an emergence. It's the process of bringing together these opposing forces. It's the way, it's like, if we look at the elephant metaphor, it's the whatever, the smooth trunk. No, it's the hard foot. No, it's the, crunchy skin. All of those are true. And it's in this dialogue between all 6 people or 6 billion people or whatever it is. It's actually that, like you were saying, that whole marketplace of ideas. It's not, and I think we touched on this last week, but it's not actually about arriving to a place ever. It is about this journey of, exploration, of moving from one state, one place, one kind of stuckness into another new kind of tension. And I think that's a really helpful, just a really helpful lens shift, because we do get so kind of caught up in problem solution and thinking, we're here, we should be here. And that's that left hemisphere orientation to the world. But if we think about this more as this kind of multi-sensory journey where we're experiencing and, that kind of, and thinking through metaphor and just that creative exploration, experimentation, where, there's new information coming in all of the time, and any of it is potentially really valuable, even revelatory. Then it's just a different way to think about, we're not necessarily problem solving to get to a destination. We're just expanding possibilities and like shedding old skin. So I just think it's just an interesting shift for us.
And I like that way of putting it. Yeah. I mean, I think I understood everything you said, though you almost lost me when you talked about this elephant having a crunchy skin. I just,
Don't they have crunchy
I
skin?
just hadn't, I don't know. I've never gotten that close to it. I'm not sure I would get that close to an elephant, but I didn't know it was crunchy. But that sort of misses the point. It misses the point.
Now I'm wondering. I have a lot of elephant pictures that I've taken over the years.
But I think that, the emphasis on, another emphasis in dialectics is not on getting to the right outcome or getting to the perfect synthesis or anything like that. It's more in the process. It's in the process of holding different ingredients that are opposing or different views of the elephant from different angles or different, views of whether the kid should go on vacation with the family. It's holding those things for a while, allowing a little time, allowing a little space, allowing a little creative thought, and allowing yourself to go deeply into each place and then come out with, hey, what about this? And what about this is a great comment, no matter what it is, almost. Like, what about this is curiosity. It fosters creativity. And that's a dialectical intervention. What about this? I mean, it's not listed as one of Linehan's dialectical strategies, but it's actually it kind of is, because one of her strategies is called dialectical assessment, by which you just mean what is left out. What's left out of this situation?
Right. Well, I think that's just an interesting way for us to even think about or talk about, these larger social issues. It's like, well, what would it look like if, rather than thinking about it as getting to a different place, not just us thinking about it this way, but, more collectively, what would it look like if we were operating dialectically, having to make decisions and create institutions that really had a dialectical view? Functionally, how would that work, and would that work for us? What would we have to give up, and in terms of efficiency, in terms of clarity, and then what would we gain? I just think it's an interesting exploration.
I think in our conversations, my thinking has been so driven by clinical situations and personal situations, and not necessarily. And I have a sort of a lightweight, so far developed application to social and cultural issues. But I know you've been thinking about those things more and from different angles. So I think it'll be great to have you lead the way into defining one of these. I mean, we're talking about this gun debate right now, but there are so many things that you could begin to approach with some of these principles. And then I'm not sure, I don't feel I have much expertise in those things, though I think it's possible to bring the same principles to bear.
Absolutely. And I think that, one of the things this whole week was about, looking at complex social systems, but it came down to the individuals that are a part of these systems, and really the kind of human mechanisms, whether it be of belonging, isolation, fear, anxiety, all of the I think the arenas where you are expert. And so, for me, and when we look at complex adaptive systems, there really isn't a clean separation between what is the realm of the individual and the realm of the larger system. And I think that by making that separation, we sometimes do ourselves a disservice. And I think it's really interesting to kind of bring in this individual, kind of psychological lens into these larger social systems, and rather than thinking of them as something other, thinking of them as really like, okay, these are human beings, that have complicated home lives and all of these same places, because I think it's that gap that actually creates some of these, I don't know, these tensions, these chasms for us in society at large. I mean, whether it's on social media or anywhere else, is that we lose our humanity as we get to the institutional level.
And I see. I wondered. I know what you mean. Then I wasn't sure what you meant by the gap, but I think I know what you mean now. Is that once you start thinking about these bigger issues, you can lose your grip on what you know about personally, like what these things feel like to people. And so, all right. So
people just like us, like in these, it's and it's just it's just a collection of a lot of people, just people, always.
All right. So I'm going to decide. I'm just going to declare that you and I are capable of having these conversations,
Oh, yeah.
and just as much as people on sports podcasts are capable of talking about the NBA, acting as if they know something, And I hope this will be
that's a place
helpful.
to start. I think
All
it
right.
will. No, I think it will. Okay, awesome. So
So
that was great.
let's stop. It's great to see you. I'm going to
Likewise.
stop recording.
Have a
All
fun
right.
road trip.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.